I remember the dust of Tunisia better than I remember the faces of some of my own family. It was a fine choking powder that got into your lungs, your rations, and the very gears of your soul. We were told the Americans were green amateurs playing at a professionals game. In February 1943, during the chaos around Sidi Bou Zid, it felt like we were right. I was there when the 1st Armored Division took a beating they'll never forget. They were retreating toward Kasserine, leaving behind the wreckage of a dream. But among the smoldering hulls, we found something that didn't look like a failure. It was an M4 Sherman, pristine, nicknamed War Daddy II. The Americans had abandoned it not because it was broken, but because the fog of war had swallowed their resolve. When our recovery teams climbed inside, they didn't find a cramped, oily coffin like our Panzers. They found a machine that looked like it had been built by a clockmaker on a massive scale. We drove that tank 200 miles across the desert to Tunis. No breakdowns, no overheating. It just ran. We shipped it to Kummersdorf, Germany's Holy of Holies, for weapons testing. The engineers there were arrogant. They expected to see the crude work of Prohibition-era gangsters. Instead, they saw the end of the Reich written in steel. The Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was a symptom of an industrial fever that Germany couldn't catch. While we were hand-polishing the transmission gears of our Tigers like they were fine jewelry, the Americans were stamping out Shermans like they were soup cans. At Kummersdorf, the engineers stripped War Daddy II to its bare bones. They found a Continental R975 radial engine. It was an aircraft engine. For heaven's sake, it was light, powerful, and you could reach every spark plug without a specialized engineering degree. In our tanks, if a transmission failed, you practically had to rebuild the front of the vehicle. In the Sherman, they had bolted the transmission to the front with a series of simple flanges. You could swap the whole unit in a fraction of the time. Subscribe Frontline Docs to know real, unsaid, dark truth of World War II. This was the first cracks in the mirror of our perceived superiority. We looked at the armor 51 millimeters on the front and laughed. Our 88 millimeters guns could core it like an apple from a mile away, but the engineers weren't looking at the thickness. They were looking at the welds. They were uniform. They were machine-made. It meant that every single Sherman coming off the line in Detroit or Pennsylvania was exactly as good as the one before it. We lacked that consistency. Our steel was becoming brittle as the blockade choked off our supply of molybdenum and manganese. The Americans had a literal continent of resources, and they were using it to achieve a level of reliability that felt like witchcraft to us. When the reports started reaching the high command, they were dismissed. The generals wanted to hear about quality over quantity. They didn't want to hear that the quantity had a quality all its own. They saw the Sherman as a Ronson, a lighter that burned on the first strike because of its tendency to catch fire when the ammunition was hit. But they ignored the fact that the Americans were already fixing that with wet stowage bins. They ignored the fact that the Sherman had a gyro stabilizer. Think about that. In 1943, while we were struggling to get enough radio sets for our platoons, the Americans were putting gyroscopic stabilizers in their mass-produced tanks. It meant they could keep their gun on target while moving over rough terrain. We had to stop, let the suspension settle for 10 seconds, and then fire. In a duel, those 10 seconds were the difference between life and a burning grave. Subscribe Frontline Docs to know real, unsaid, dark truth of World War II. The arrogance of our leadership was our undoing. They organized a demonstration at Hillersleben. They wanted to prove the Sherman was a toy. They put it up against a 30-degree sandy slope. Our Panther, with its wide, overlapping road wheels, sailed up that hill. The Sherman, with its narrow tracks designed for the paved roads of Europe and the hard-packed soil of the USA, struggled and slid. The generals cheered. They thought they had won, but the engineers stood in the back, silent. They knew the Panther that climbed the hill had a final drive that would likely shatter after 150 kilometers. The Sherman that failed the climb had just driven across a desert and would likely drive all the way to Berlin if given the chance. We were building sprinters for a marathon. By the time 1944 rolled around, the dark truth wasn't a secret to those of us in the mud. The Sherman was becoming a flood. Wikipedia facts will tell you that the United States produced nearly 50,000 Shermans. If a Sherman lost a track in the bocage of Normandy, the crew could scavenge parts from a wrecked tank nearby and be back in the fight by sunset. If a Tiger lost a road wheel, it was a logistical nightmare. Our interleaved wheel system meant that to change one inner wheel, you had to remove several outer wheels. It was an engineer's dream and a soldier's nightmare. I saw a column of Shermans once after the breakthrough at Avranches. They were equipped with 75mm guns that, while lacking the punch of our long 75s or 88s, had a devastating high explosive round. They weren't just fighting tanks. Because they didn't break down, they could sustain and advance for weeks. We were constantly abandoning our superior Panzers because of a snapped drive shaft or a leaked oil seal. Subscribe Frontline Docs to know real, unsaid, dark truth of World War II. The Americans also had the Sherman Firefly and the 76mm variants coming into play. They realized their 75mm was struggling against our heavy armor, so they adapted. That was the genius of the Sherman. It was a modular platform. They turned them into duplex-drive swimming tanks for D-Day, and they turned them into Zippo flamethrowers. We tried to make a specialized vehicle for every single task, which meant our factories were constantly retooling, and our mechanics were constantly confused. The Americans made one chassis and made it do everything. I remember talking to a captured American sergeant. He was cocky, even in a cage. You can't win a war with watches when the other guy has 1,000,000 cars. He was right. Albert Speer, our Minister of Armaments, saw the reports from Kummersdorf and the evaluations of War Daddy II. He pointed out that the American Sherman could be serviced by a farm boy with a wrench, while our tanks required factory-trained specialists. Subscribe Frontline Docs to know real, unsaid, dark truth of World War II. The reality of the Sherman was its ergonomic superiority. It had quick-release hatches, better vision blocks, and even a built-in stove for the crew's rations in some models. A comfortable crew is a combat-effective crew. We were exhausted, cramped, and half-deaf from the roar of engines that were always on the verge of exploding. When a Sherman took a hit, the crew had a significantly higher chance of escaping because of the spring-loaded hatches. We lost our best-trained men because they couldn't get out of their superior tanks fast enough when they caught fire. The dark truth of the Western Front was that we were being outthought, not just outproduced. The Sherman's vertical volute spring suspension, VVSS, was simple and rugged. When the Americans saw it was struggling in the mud of the European winter, they simply bolted on duckbill extenders to increase the surface area. Later, they introduced the horizontal volute spring suspension, HVSS, on the Easy 8 models. It was a constant evolution. We, on the other hand, were stuck. We were paralyzed by our own pursuit of a perfect tank that didn't exist. By the winter of 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the tragedy of German engineering reached its peak. We threw everything we had left at the Allies' King Tigers, Panthers, the works. On paper, it should have been a slaughter. A King Tiger's front armor was virtually impenetrable to a standard Sherman. But the facts, the real Wikipedia-supported history, shows that we lost more tanks to mechanical failure and lack of fuel than to American shells. I saw King Tigers abandoned on the side of the road because their transmissions had literally disintegrated under the weight of their own armor. Meanwhile, the Shermans kept coming. They were like a tide. You can stop a wave, but you can't stop the ocean. I remember a specific engagement near a small village. We had a Jag Panther, a beautiful lethal tank destroyer. It had a clear shot at a column of Shermans. It knocked out 2. The others didn't flee. They used their superior turret traverse, speed, and other quality our leaders ignored to find our position. Our turrets were moved by complex hydraulic systems that were slow and prone to leaking. The Sherman's turret could spin 360 degrees in 15 seconds. Before our commander could even relay the coordinates, 3 Shermans had their guns pointed at our flank. We had to bail out. As I ran for the woods, I looked back and saw those Shermans pushing our superior machine into a ditch like it was a piece of scrap metal. Subscribe Frontline docs to know real unsaid dark truth of World War II. The Kummersdorf report on War Daddy II had predicted all of this. It warned that the Sherman's herringbone gears were the key. These were precision-cut helical teeth that allowed for smooth power transfer. Germany couldn't make them in bulk because we lacked the tungsten carbide for the cutting tools. The Allied blockade had worked. We were forced to use straight-cut spur gears that screeched and wore out within 100 miles. The Sherman was a testament to a global supply chain that we simply didn't have. They had the rubber from Southeast Asia, eventually synthetic, the oil from Texas, and the steel from the Great Lakes. We had ersatz, everything. As we retreated into the heart of Germany, the sight of a Sherman became a symbol of our inevitable defeat. It wasn't the Tommy Cooker our propaganda mocked. It was the steel general. I saw them driving through the ruins of our cities, their engines humming with that distinct, reliable purr. They didn't need the massive heavy-lift trailers our tanks required. They just drove. They drove over the Rhine, they drove through the Ruhr, and they drove right into the history books. Our Tigers and Panthers are in museums today, remembered as magnificent failures. The Sherman is remembered as the tank that won the war. Subscribe Frontline docs to know real, unsaid, dark truth of World War II. The final dark truth is that we knew. We knew from the moment War Daddy II was stripped down in April 1943. We knew that the American industrial machine wasn't just making weapons. It was making a new kind of war, a war where the mechanic was as important as the gunner, a war where good enough in massive numbers was infinitely better than perfect in dozens. I survived the war, but my Panzers didn't. They are rust and memories now. But somewhere in a veterans parade or a dusty archive, there's a Sherman that would probably start right up if you turn the key. That is the legacy of the Sherman. It wasn't the biggest, it wasn't the strongest, but it was there when it was needed. It was reliable, it was versatile, and it was produced with a clarity of purpose that our superior engineering could never match. We lost the war in the factories of Detroit long before we lost it on the battlefields of France. War Daddy, too, was the messenger, but we were too proud to read the message. We chose the masterpiece, but the Americans chose the machine, and the machine won. It's a lot to take in, I know, but the truth isn't meant to be comfortable. If you want to keep walking this path with me and uncover the real unsaid dark truth of World War II, then make sure you subscribe to Frontline Docs, because history only repeats itself when we forget the cost of the first time.